Okay, let's get started, everyone. Welcome everyone to the interview and discussion with Ann Bracken, presented to you by the Association of Chinese Helping Professionals and Psychologists International, which is abbreviated as ACHPPI. My name is Huaiyu Zhang. I'm a licensed psychologist in California. Please, and we will have Rebekah Gong as the interpreter for today's session. And please introduce yourself, Rebekah.
欢迎大家来参加安的访谈和交流讨论。这次的活动是由 ACHPPI， 也就是国际华人互助协会和心理学家协会主办的。刚刚在发言的老师是张华宇老师，他是加州的一位职业心理学家，他也是今天安的访谈者。那本次活动的中英文翻译呢，由我来支持。我来介绍一下自己。Hello, Ann. I'm a licensed psychotherapist in private practice in California. I had the honor of hosting an ACHPPI event before. I'm more than glad to come back and support this organization again, especially support the interview and discussion between you and Huaiyu as an interpreter today. I look forward to learning from your story and your wisdom. 大家好，我是 Rebekah， 我是一位在加州独立职业的心理治疗师，之前也有幸主持过ACHPPI 的活动，很高兴再次来支持这个组织，也支持安和Huaiyu的访谈，然后也期待跟各位同仁一起共同学习。
I'm announcing our disclaimer for this event. This event does not constitute any medical advice or medical suggestions, and neither the position of our guest today nor the position of our host, me, represents that of ACHPPI. And this event is being recorded and it will be uploaded to the ACHPPI channel, both in YouTube and Bilibili.
这次活动要首先做一个声明，就是我们的活动它不构成任何的医疗的意见或者是建议，嘉宾的立场、主持人的立场都不代表 ACHPPI 的立场。本次活动呢会有一个录制，大家可以看到哈，这个录制会被上传到 ACHPPI 的 YouTube 和 Bilibili 频道。
And there are two parts to this event today. We will start with the interview and followed by Q&A discussions. Please mute yourself if you are not one of the guests, the interpreter, and the host during the interview portion. And please do not interrupt the interview. And after the interview, during the Q&A phase, we will go from the oldest question to the newest question shown in the chat box, and then we can have more open discussion with everyone.
今天的活动分成两个部分，第一个部分是对安的访谈的部分，那访谈结束后的第二个部分呢是提问和讨论，请大家在访谈的过程当中保持静音，避免打断访谈。那么等在问答部分的时候呢，我们会先从聊天框里面，就是 Zoom 的 chat box 聊天框里面最早出现的问题开始进行交流。
We're really excited and honored to have you back. And back in July, when I hosted the screening of the documentary Medicating Normal, you participated as one of the panelists, despite the technical issues that we struggled with in that discussion. Your insight, your wisdom, critical thinking, and compassion was really very impactful. It had a really powerful impact in the discussion that time. And at that time, my biggest wish was we could have a bit longer time to continue the discussions, because we had questions that we did not have time to be addressed. And here it is. This is the opportunity to have you back and have more of you with us. Welcome back, Ann. Please start with the introduction after Rebekah's interpretation.
Thank you for the cue. Yeah. 非常兴奋哈，也能够把安再次邀请回来，因为我们之前7月份的时候那个药治常人的观影活动的时候呢，其实有一些技术上的问题哈，然后当时但是在那种情况下，安提供的洞察，他提供的这种批判性的想法，他提供的这种同理心和慈悲心，都有非常重要的影响对于怀宇来说。那当时怀宇提出非常期待也能有更多的时间回应观众们听众们当时提出的问题哈。今天的话我们有这个机会做这个事情哈，能够把你再次邀请回来，所以非常欢迎，然后邀请安介绍一下自己。I finished my interpretation and I think I invite you to introduce yourself earlier. If you're
okay.
ready. Yeah.
Okay. My name is Ann Bracken. I live in Columbia, Maryland, and I was a special education teacher for over 20 years. In addition to that work, I also taught professional writing at the University of Maryland. And I spent a large part of my life, all of my growing up years, with my mother, who struggled with chronic depression and chronic pain. And she never got well. So the kind of the specter that hung over our household was that if you get depressed, it will stay that way forever. So I was resolved never to have to struggle with depression and to be strong. But like all people, things happen in your life, and I had several periods of depression, and it's really 30 years ago now that I experienced a chronic migraine that lasted for 7 years and a depression that lasted for 4. And the book that I wrote is, I should stop. Rebekah?
Thank you. Thank you, Ann. Yeah. 我的名字是 Ann Bracken， 然后我住在马里兰州的哥伦比亚。然后我是一个特殊教育的老师，我做老师做了20多年哈。除此之外呢，我也在马里兰大学教授专业写作。我花了我的生命当中很多的时间，我的成年之后的时间，和我的妈妈在一起。那我的母亲呢，她长期遭受这种持续性的抑郁和慢性疾病的痛苦，她其实从未康复，从未完全康复哈。那这对我们整个家庭的影响来说，就是如果你得了抑郁症，那就意味着你会永远都受它折磨。我本来认为自己是会很强大，很强大。我本来也认为自己会在面临这些困难的时候是很强大的，但是跟所有人一样哈，你生命当中总会出现一些事件哈。其实我自己也有几个不同时期的时候都遭到了抑郁的影响。其实是30年之前就开始经历了这种慢性的偏头痛哈。持续了长达7年，那之后抑郁发生了，持续了4年。那我现在写的这本书呢，就是刚刚安就停在了这个地方哈，给了我一个机会翻译。好的，
谢谢。
Okay, so the book that I wrote is called Crash, a memoir of over-medication and recovery. And in that book, I tell my story of dealing with severe pain and depression and getting well, and my mother's story of not being able to recover. And the way that I was able to put her information together is that I found my father's records for 30 years of her illness. So with that information, I could use my memory and his records and research to tell my mother's story.
写的这本书呢，它的中文翻译的名字是祸哈，英文的名字是 Crash。谢谢这个，现在大家可以看到这个封面。那它是一本关于过度用药 和康复的回忆录。在这个书里面呢，我讲述了我自己，就是应对严重的疼痛和抑郁，并且康复的故事，也讲述了我的母亲她一直没有能够得到康复的经历。我组织这些内容的一个方式呢，就是我发现了我的父亲收藏的关于母亲30年以来的这种疾病的一些记录啊。通过使用那些信息呢，我得以使用我自己的记忆和父亲收藏的那些记录，还有一些研究啊，来讲述我母亲的故事。And do you want to continue, or are you finished?
No,
finished
that's all. That's all.
Okay.
Okay, thanks for sharing that. And you mentioned about your mother's kind of years of struggle with depression. And is there anything else about your mom you would like to share with us, Ann?
Well, yes.
谢谢安的分享。Let me translate first. Yeah. 谢谢安的分享。你提到了关于妈妈多年的与抑郁斗争的这些年的经历哈。除此之外，你还有什么关于母亲想要跟我们分享的
吗？When my mother was in the nursing home, when she was very elderly, I found a portfolio with fashion designs in my parents' basement. And I discovered that my mother had always wanted to be a fashion designer. So I took the designs and had them framed and then took them to her in the nursing home. And that's when she told me I always wanted to be a fashion designer, something that she had never shared with any of us.
当母亲年纪很长的时候，她住在疗养院当中我在我父母的地下室里面找到了一个时装设计的作品集，然后那个时候我才发现，原来我的母亲一直有一个作为时装设计师的梦想。当我拿着她那些设计，然后把它装饰用框装起来，然后把这些带到了当时在疗养院当中的母亲的面前哈。那时候她才告诉我，她一直都想做一个时装设计师。她在此之前，她从来没有跟任何人分享这个梦想。
Thank you. And with your permission, I'm going to be showing a photo of your mother and also some of the fashion designs that she made from the portfolio that you found.
Okay, sure.
经过安的允许哈，华语即将给我们看到的是安的母亲的一张照片，以及她做的一些时装设计的作品。
I made a PowerPoint slideshow of it. I'm showing that. So this is a photo of Ann's mom. And
是安的妈妈的照片。
her designs.
她的设计图。
Very gifted artworks.
Yes, she was.
有天赋的作品。
And what is your current understanding of your mother's suffering, the nature of her suffering?
Well, after I did the research, I was pretty much able to surmise that my mother didn't recover because she was severely over-medicated. And the two things that she suffered the most from were anxiety and insomnia. And finding my father's records allowed me to see what drugs she was taking, and then to look up those drugs and see what the adverse effects are. And that's how I came to the conclusion.
刚刚怀宇的提问就是想请问安对于他母亲的痛苦他是怎么理解的这么多年的痛苦。那安的回应是说，当我做了这些研究之后，我可以总结，我得出的一个结论就是，我母亲从未真的康复，是因为她被严重的过度用药了。那安分享到，母亲最挣扎就痛苦的2件事情，一个是焦虑，一个是失眠。通过找到父亲收藏的这些记录，安发现，当年母亲所吃的是什么样的药，然后他有机会去查询这些药物，然后找到了一些这些药物带来的副作用和影响，这是帮助他得出了之前提出的这个结论。
Thanks for sharing that, Anne. And I also noticed from reading your book, Crash, I have a copy of it here with me, that your mom also went through many episodes of convulsive therapy. And as far as you can recall, how did that impact her?
I never saw much improvement. I know that when my parents would get very desperate and feel like my mother was just getting worse, Dad would call a doctor in Baltimore who did electroconvulsive therapy treatments in his home office.
关于刚刚的提问，就是说，他在书中，在安的书中看到了母亲其实曾经多次经历这种电休克治疗，然后安的回应是，即便经历了这么多电休克治疗，我们其实没有看到母亲有很多改善。当时，他的父母其实都非常的痛苦，就感觉到好像母亲只是变得越来越糟。甚至当时父亲也好像是从巴尔的摩请了医生啊，家里为他做这种电休克治疗，仍然没有起色。
And the main thing I noticed was that she had pretty severe memory problems after each treatment. And they never seemed to really help her as far as so-called getting out of depression.
我注意到最重要的就是母亲因为参加这样的电休克治疗而记忆力受到了很多影响。我并不认为这样的治疗真的能够帮助到他，只是所谓的帮助他摆脱抑郁。
And if your mom could have relived her life, what ways of healing do you think would have actually been beneficial to her instead of being iatrogenic?
Well, she was first diagnosed with postpartum depression.
如果怀宇的问题是，如果母亲能够重新活一次的话，那安妮会认为什么样的治疗方式会对她更有益的呢？更能够减少这种医源性的伤害呢？那安的回应是，起初母亲得到了诊断是这个产后抑郁。
And I think that she needed a lot more help with the children and all the chores in the house. There were 3 children between 7 and 4, and then a newborn. And my father worked different shifts. So sometimes he worked from 8 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon. And sometimes he worked from midnight to 8 in the morning. So when he worked, that was called a night shift. When he worked a night shift, my mother had to keep all of us children quiet in the daytime. And I think she was just under tremendous stress and she was fatigued from having a newborn.
我认为当时的母亲在家务上其实需要很多帮助和支持， 尤其是他当时带着3个孩子，有3个孩子是从4岁到7岁不等，还有1个孩子是新生儿。当时的父亲其实上班很多就不同的班制吧，然后有些时候是从早上8点到下午4点，有些时候是从半夜到上午8点。那当父亲上夜班的时候呢，他要休息，所以母亲就在白天的时候需要保证所有的孩子都是很安静的，不会影响到父亲的休息。我认为那个时候的母亲其实承受了巨大的压力，而且也非常非常的疲惫，尤其是刚刚生完了一个小孩。
So I think she needed literal help, with children and chores, and she also needed emotional support, maybe from her friends. There really weren't therapists then the way that we have therapists now. Most people who got any kind of therapy went to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrists were male. This was in 1959, and women were supposed to be happy and happy to have a baby and to be raising children. So anybody who struggled was looked at as having some kind of malfunction, I guess.
我认为他当时真的需要帮助，一方面是实实在在的对于带孩子、家务活方面的帮助，另外一方面其实也是情感上的帮助和支持，有可能是来自于朋友的情感上的支持。那当时其实没有很多心理治疗师啊，就我们现在所说的心理治疗师。当时大家更多的所谓的治疗是去看一个精神科大夫，然后这个psychiatrist 这个精神科大夫呢，通常都是男性啊，那个时候是1919年，所以对于女性的社会期待，往往是你是需要做一个快乐的女性你有一个孩子是快乐的，你养孩子也是快乐的，所以所有在这当中挣扎的女性呢，被认为是你是有点不正常，是这样的一个社会的环境。
And are you thinking or are you done with your
No,
answer?
I'm finished.
Okay. I'm just really touched by what you have shared. As a mother of 3 young kids, living in a country away from my close family members, with limited resources, I can very much relate to that experience of heaviness that you have described. Thanks for sharing that. You are not just speaking for your mother.
No, because it happened to me too. It happened to me after I had my second child. So it's very profound. And I think American society still does not support new mothers. And I just call it new baby tired. I have never been as tired in my life as after I had my children. And then your sleep is disrupted sometimes for months. So it's a very, very physically taxing and emotionally taxing time.
刚刚怀宇很动情的分享非常非常的被安的分享所触动因为怀宇也是作为3个孩子的母亲，然后远离自己的家庭，所以得到的资源和支持都是有限的，所以他对于安的母亲的经历是感觉非常能够感同身受那种在养育孩子当中的沉重感，所以非常感谢安的分享。怀宇也觉得安的分享不只是说他母亲的经历其实也是为了其他的母亲的经历。那安刚刚就接着分享说，这件事情其实也发生在我自己身上。当安生育了第2个孩子之后，这样的影响是很深远的。安还说到，就是美国社会到现在其实也没有那么支持新生儿的母亲这样的支持还是有限的。作为新生儿的母亲，你的睡眠总是受到影响，使这样的情况持续数月所以他身体上来说，它是非常非常让人疲劳；在情绪上来说，也是让人非常非常疲劳的事情。
So, and when I was reading your book, it brought tears to my eyes when I got to the last paragraph of the book, that paragraph about your mother. Can you read it aloud for us?
Sure. When I close my eyes now and think about Mom, I see pictures of her with all of us kids when she came home from the hospital for her occasional Sunday visits.
刚刚华语是邀请安分享，他为我们分享一段，尤其是在安的书中关于他母亲的最后一段，当华语读到这一段的时候，非常感动，到热泪盈眶。所以请安为我们朗读那一段。安刚刚读了一句是：现如今，当我闭上眼睛想起母亲，我可以看到她跟我们这些孩子在一起的样子。那时候她在周日偶尔会从医院回来看我们。
Pictures of Mom at the beach and Mom dressed up and hosting a party. Her smile was brilliant. She looks relaxed and happy, leaning up against my father or snuggling with all of us on the sofa.
我看到母亲在海滩的样子，母亲打扮得漂漂亮亮，举办派对的样子。她看起来笑容灿烂，看起来轻松快乐。靠在我父亲身上，或者和我们这些孩子一起依偎在沙发上。
And now, instead of being disappointed at all the things Mom didn't do, I marvel that she kept her life going so well, given the powerful drugs she took for so many years. My mother was amazing. Telling her story is my way of reaching back in time to heal her, to help her, and to let her know that someone heard her in the darkness.
现如今，我不再因为母亲没有做到的一些事情而失望，而是惊叹于她在多年服用强效药物的情况下，还能够那么努力的生活。我的母亲很了不起，讲述她的故事，是我穿越时间，回到过去，疗愈她，帮助她的方式。我想让她知道，有人在黑暗中听到了她的声音。
Thanks for reading that. And what is it like for you now to read that at this moment?
I feel like I'm sending her a message. You know, really a big part of writing the book was to vindicate her and to help other people see that there's nothing to be ashamed of. You know, nothing that she went through was her fault. She wasn't a weak person. She was incredibly strong. Nothing that I went through was my fault. And the same way with anybody who suffers from depression or anxiety or chronic pain.
刚刚华宇提问哈，现在安在读这一段是什么样的心情呢？那安的分享是，好像就像我在为妈妈发出一个讯息，想让她知道，其实我写这本书很大的原因就是想为她证明，想帮助其他人看到，如果你正在挣扎，像母亲一样的类似的原因和事件哈，这并不是你的错，没有什么值得羞愧的。我的母亲她并不是一个软弱的人，这不是她的错，她其实非常非常的强大。跟其他人这些挣扎着处理面对生命中的抑郁、焦虑和慢性疾病的所有人都一样，这也不是你们的错。
I'm very touched by that, and it's really powerful, Anne. And what you said reminded me of a comment made by a British psychologist, John Reed. He said, you may recall that notion. He said that we have depression, or depression happens because depressing things happen to the person.
Absolutely. We've gotten away from looking at the circumstances of a person's life. And I don't remember who exactly said this, but instead of going to a doctor and having the doctor say what's wrong with you or telling you what's wrong with you, they need to ask what happened to you.
所以刚刚分享到他非常非常的感动，然后也觉得安的描述非常的有力量。华语想起了一位英国的心理学家 John Reed 的分享哈，他的有一个概念理念就是我们有抑郁，就是不是我们有抑郁，而是抑郁的事情发生在那个人身上。安的回应是的确如此哈，我们必须要看一看这个人的生命里面发生了什么。我不太记得具体谁说了，但是记得有这样的一句话哈，去看医生的时候，那个医生他不应该说你有什么问题你有什么毛病，他应该问你，他需要问你，你身上发生了什么事情。
Yeah, it's critical to understand the context, the circumstances the person goes through, not just kind of work on putting blame on this person for the struggle.
Right.
非常重要，了解情境了解他生命的环境，而不是指责正在挣扎的这个人。
And now let's switch gear and to talk about your own personal experience. So my question is, it actually has two parts. And how did you understand your suffering when you were on kind of host of psychiatric medications? And in contrast, how do you understand your experience now?
Well, my doctors right away started telling me I had a chemical imbalance. And that didn't make any sense to me, even 30 years ago. I just said, are you telling me that one day everything in my brain is fine, and then suddenly for no reason something goes wrong and I have to take drugs for the rest of my life? And they said yes. And I said, that doesn't make any sense.
刚刚怀宇说，那我们来谈一谈安他个人的经历吧。怀宇提出了问题，这个问题分为两部分，就是安是如何理解当时他在接受这种精神类药物治疗的时候，他是如何理解自己的痛苦。那与之对比的是，他现在又是如何理解他自己的经历。安的回应是，当时他的医生一开始就说，你有这个化学不平衡的问题，那其实从30年前他就听到这样的说法哈，他一直其实不太理解这样的说法，就问医生，你是在告诉我，其实基本上每天我的脑子都是好的，只是都是好的，就突然不知道什么原因，就是有的东西出了问题，所以呢，我现在我的余生，我的整个下半辈子，我都要吃这个药，是这样吗？医生说是的。可是他对我来说，他并不合理。
So what that did to me when none of the drugs would work, it just made me feel more and more broken, even though there was something inside that kept saying, this is much more than a chemical imbalance, because I'm a very spiritual person and I actually saw my whole experience of depression and chronic pain as some kind of dark night of the soul.
对我来说，产生的效果是，我并不认为这些药物是有帮助的，相反，它让我感觉到越来越破碎。今天是我心中有一个声音说，这其实比化学不平衡更要严重，因为我自己是一个非常灵性或者是相信灵性的人， 事实上看待我自己整个抑郁的经历和慢性疾病的经历，我认为它是对我的心灵来说是一个暗夜。
I just didn't know exactly what it was that was so difficult for me. But the longer my experience of chronic pain and depression lasted, the more verbally abusive my ex-husband became, until I reached the point where I realized that's what was so painful for me, was spending all this time with someone who was verbally abusing me. And the really awful thing was that as long as I was in pain, I really couldn't leave because I couldn't work. So I had to get, first I knew I had to get out of the pain, and I was just determined to get well.
起初并不确切的知道为什么对我来说生活那么的困难，但是当我在经历这些慢性疼痛、经历抑郁的过程当中，我的前夫对我有更多的语言上的虐待，然后我意识到，为什么这么的痛苦？我的生命为什么这么的痛苦？是因为我花了很多时间和一个语言虐待我的人在一起。真正糟糕的事情就是，当我在痛苦当中的时候，我其实不能离开，因为我当时还不能够工作。
Are you finished? Okay, I have a follow-up question. And in terms of during the phase when you were on these psychiatric drugs, how did that impact you?
Well, it was awful. It was really awful. I gained 50 pounds. I had trouble recalling words. I usually have a very good vocabulary, and I just had a terrible vocabulary. I shook, my hands shook because of the drugs. And for a couple of years, I fought off suicidal thoughts. And I'm sure now that I know more about the drugs, those thoughts were a result of the drugs, but it was absolutely awful.
关于提了一个问题啊，就是说，在安自己在服用精神病性药物的期间，这样的药物对他产生了什么影响？安的回应是，他真的非常非常的糟糕，我增重了50磅，我记不起怎么说一些词，我曾经有很好的词汇量，但那段时间我词汇量真的很糟糕，我的手一直在抖，就是因为吃了这些药物。那有好几年我都一直在这种想自杀的念头挣扎。我很确定我现在对这些药物更了解了。我觉得我当时有那些想法跟吃这些药相关的。
Thank you for sharing that. And I recall that the title of your book, Crash, is based on a car accident you had, which you kind of depicted in the beginning of your book.
Yes.
Tell more about that kind of circumstance when it happened. What was your well-being like, and how that kind of impacted you, like a turning point?
Okay. The two car accidents happened in December of 1999 and January of 2000. And at the time, I was no longer depressed, but I still had a severe daily migraine.
关于提出一个问题啊，就是他提到，安的这本书《Crash》，它的这个名字是基于，安遭受的车祸，然后安也在他的书的这开头描述了这个车祸。安的分享是， 这两起车祸发生在1999年的12月份和2010年的1月份。在那个时候呢，安其实已经不再抑郁了，但是呢，仍然有非常严重，每天都有非常严重的这个偏头痛。
So the drugs I was taking were Wellbutrin, Topamax, Valium, and Elavil for so-called keeping me out of depression. And the drugs I was taking for migraine pain were methadone, an injectable drug called DHE45, Migranol nasal spray, and I never drove under the influence of Demerol, but I had injectable Demerol in my home that the doctor gave me when the pain was unbearable.
这一段可能需要法语的支持，因为有一些药物哈，我只知道英文的讲法，我不知道你能就是帮我想到中文讲。
我也不知道所有的翻译就能翻译多少是多少，剩下的就是之类了，只能抱歉。
安刚刚提到了一系列，他当时在吃药物，Wellbutrin 啊，Topamax 啊，Valium 啊和 Elavil，这些理论上是说可以帮他对抗这个他的抑郁哈。他还吃了一些针对他的偏头痛痛苦的一些药物哈，这个有 methadone， 是美沙酮，还有一个叫做 DHA45的一个药物，还是可能是用来这个鼻喷啊 nasal spray， 就是用来喷鼻子的一个药物哈。我之前他说我之前是不会在这些药物的影响下开车的，但是我刚巧呢在家中接受了医生给我的药物。
So you probably know that taking an opioid and Valium together is a very dangerous combination. And I believe that's what was making me fall asleep while doze off while I was driving. And the one car accident, I swerved across an interstate 5 times and crashed into a fence. And the other car accident, I was in city traffic and I dozed off at a traffic light and crashed into the back of a van.
可能在听的听众可能也会了解啊，如果是同时服用阿片类的药物呢和梵宁一起使用的话，那可能是一个非常危险的结合哈。我现在想起来，我想那就是他让我当时打盹儿开车的时候犯困的重要的原因。然后就在我开车犯困的时候，有另外一辆车，它就是从跨州的方向过来哈，就是开入了一个路边的梵宁。那另外一个车祸发生的时候是在城市的交通当中，那个时候我也是在等交通灯的时候打盹了所以撞到了一个货车的后面。
So with the second car accident, I was sufficiently upset that when I went home, I resolved to do something different. I realized that whatever the doctors were doing was not working at all. And I had a good friend who had worked with an energy healer. So I decided to work with an energy healer to get off of the pain medication.
在第二次车祸之后呢，是非常的不开心哈。我回家之后呢，我决定我要找一些不同的方式来帮助自己。我意识到，不管医生给我提供了什么，他对我来说都是没有帮助的。当时有个很好的朋友，他得到了一些能量疗愈的支持，他自己感觉是很有效果的。所以我也决定去尝试找一个能量的治愈者，去帮助我摆脱这些就是为了止痛吃的药物。
Great, and this is a nice segue to the next question. Tell us more about your path of healing.
I think the biggest influences that helped me to finally get out of depression were my spirituality, my prayer groups that I met with regularly, my daily meditation practice, and I also discovered poetry, discovered the power of poetry. And that's what really spoke to me. You know, all this baloney that the doctors were telling me about a chemical imbalance didn't make any sense. Because if it really was, then why the heck wasn't anything working?
华语说，现在可以我来请安分享看看他自己的疗愈之路哈，疗愈之旅。安说，对他而言，最有帮助的事情是包括帮助他摆脱抑郁的哈，是他的灵性的练习，他的祈祷的小组，可能会定期聚会，他的每天的这个冥想的练习，他还发现了诗歌的力量，这对他来说是很重要的连接，因为他之前医生在告诉他所谓的化学不平衡理论的时候，这对他来说完全不合理。
So the energy healer helped me to understand a lot about the energy relationships between people, so that living with someone who was constantly putting out negative energy towards me was very harmful and could result in physical pain, which I had an inkling about, but I didn't put it together without her help. And over a 4-month period of working with her, she was able to help me get rid of the pain and get off of all the pain medication so that I could leave my marriage.
对，安找到的这位能量疗愈者，帮助他理解人跟人之间的关系的能量。他意识到与一个持续把负性能量传递给他的人生活在一起，对他来说是非常有害的，他也影响他，导致他产生了很多就是这种生理上的病痛哈。他当时自己是有点感觉的，不过呢，这个能量疗愈者帮他把这一切的想法都组织了起来。在跟这个人工作了4个月之后，他自己可以摆脱了这个病痛嘛，并且已经戒掉了所有的这种止痛药，以及离开他的婚姻。
Okay. And in your book, you cited an excerpt from Mary Oliver's poem a couple of times, the poem Journey. And can you read aloud that passage that you cited in your book and share with us what it means to you? By the way, feel free to read the whole passage because Rebekah has already prepared.
Well, I don't have the book. I don't have the book with me, so I'll just read the excerpt.
Okay.
It was already late enough and a wild night, and the road full of fallen branches and stones. But little by little, as you left their voices behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds. And there was a new voice, which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save.
刚刚华语提到，在安的书中数次引用了 Mary Oliver 的诗歌旅程，所以华语邀请安为我们朗读这首诗的节选。那刚刚安读的这一段是天已经晚了，一个疯狂的夜晚，路上塞满了断枝和石头，但是渐渐的，你将他们的声音抛在脑后，星星穿透云层，散发光辉。一个新的声音出现，你慢慢意识到它是你自己的声音，伴随着你，当你越来越深的进入这个世界，决定去做你唯一能做的事，决定去拯救你唯一能拯救的心。
Thank you. And can you share with us like what's your take on the poem? What it means to you?
What the poem means to me?
Yeah.
That at times we all go through these very, very dark and difficult periods, and it feels like the whole world around you is falling apart. And that's exactly the point where your life needs to change. So you have to look deeply at what's going on in your life and decide that, if something isn't working, don't keep doing it. You need to go forth and do something else that brings you joy and brings you peace inside.
那怀宇提问安，这首诗对安的意义是什么呢？安的回应是，这首诗对我的意义是，我意识到我们总是生活当中不时会遇到一些幽暗的困难的时刻，好像那个时候感觉整个世界，你周围的整个世界都崩塌了，可是那就是当你意识到你的生命、你的生活需要变化的时候，你需要深入的仔细观察。生活当中究竟在发生些什么，然后决定如果这件事对你来说是没有帮助的，那不再做它，决定去寻找那些带给你愉快、带给你内心安宁的事。
It's really profound, and thanks for sharing that. And I remember you mentioned earlier about when you were seeing the psychiatrists or physicians in the 90s, you learned about the chemical imbalance theory of depression. And what do you know now about that theory?
Well, number one, that it's just a theory and it's been disproven repeatedly.
所以说，谢谢安刚刚的分享，非常感人。然后安提到说，怀宇提到说，安之前，也说到他在看精神科大夫的时候，在上世纪90年代见精神科大夫、见医生的时候，他了解到了所谓的化学不平衡理论，就是针对于抑郁症成因的一个理论。怀宇的问题是，那安现在对这个理论是怎么看呢？安的回应是：首先，这只是一个理论，而且它已经被反复证伪了。
And I think what it does is it serves to let the person think there's something wrong with them and sort of normalize whatever it is that's going on around them, rather than looking at the ecosystem that the person is in and saying, maybe we need to adjust something so that you can be healthy, so that you're not feeling so sad and so hopeless.
他认为这样的理论其实会让受苦痛苦的人会认为我自己是有问题的，合理化我身边生命当中进行的事情，而不是去看看这个人所处的生态系统，然后找到这个生态系统当中应该得以调整的地方，只有调整了生态系统，在系统当中的人才能够感到健康，才能够不那么抑郁，才能够不那么无望。
Thanks for sharing that amazing insight. This helped me kind of be more aware in terms of how that theory is actually quite deterministic and disempowering in some way.
Yes. I think so too. I think it's like telling, labeling children with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and not looking at anything in their life that could be causing them to distress to the point where they can't focus very well. I just feel so strongly that many of these drugs do so much harm that we should avoid them as much as possible.
怀宇提到， 这个理论它是多么的决定论哈，在某种程度上是会让受苦的人感觉到自己是没有力量的。安说我也这样认为哈。这就像安举了一个例子哈，安说这就像你给那些有注意力缺陷，就是有所谓的多动症这样标签的孩子们贴上标签哈，而不真的去看他们的生活里面真的发生了什么，来导致他们此刻没有办法集中注意。安说我强烈的感觉很多很多的药物都造成了很多的伤害，我们应该尽可能避免这种情况。
I'm glad that you brought that up as an example and in terms of the situation of ADHD, as I remember that you actually worked as a speech pathologist before and had a lot of experience working with children with that label. I wonder kind of if you can provide some advice like for people who might be worried about themselves for their attention problems or for their children regarding attention difficulties.
I think it's very complex. I think that, you know, maybe for an adult, it's different. It's different if you can work with someone and have them help you figure out what might be upsetting you to the point of distraction or, you know, something along those lines. With a child, I'm really not sure, except that I would probably, as a teacher, I would, depending on how the ADHD shows up in the child, I would suggest, you know, other ways to help them organize and pay attention and control their impulsivity rather than give them a stimulant drug.
关于问到哈，很高兴你用这个多动障碍或者是注意力缺陷标签做一个例子哈，然后我也记得你其实作为这个语言病理学家工作，尤其是之前有很多跟孩子们有这种标签的孩子们工作的经历，我好奇你有没有一些建议可以给到担心自己有这样的标签或者担心他们的孩子注意力不集中的这些人，给他们有一些建议呢？那安的回应是说，我觉得这其实是一个相对复杂的问题。那对于成年人来说，它是不同的。那么对于成年人来说，我们可以一起工作，然后找到底什么事件哈，生活当中什么事情让你这么的不愉快，以至于你需要这么的分散自己的注意力。可是如果是跟一个孩子的工作的话，其实不太能够确定哈。但如果是作为老师的话，我可能会做这样的工作哈，取决于这个注意力缺陷在这个孩子身上的表现，我可能会建议帮助孩子们找到其他的就是管理组织生活的方式，或者是培养注意力的方式，或者是帮助他们控制他们的冲动，而不是简单的给他们一个兴奋剂的药物。
Just to be clear, as a teacher, you can never advise parents to put their children on medication or to have them stop it. But what you can do is you can talk about other ways to manage the behaviors.
需要澄清的是，作为老师，你并不能建议家长，让孩子吃药或者是让孩子停药。那你可以做的就是，你可以谈论有没有其他的方式能帮孩子们管理这样的行为。
Okay, so, and I assume that you're done with answering this question.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. So time really flies. We have about 25 minutes left, and let's open up for questions. And I'm gonna be removing the spotlight from us so that we can have everyone on the gallery view.
我们现在还有25分钟我们会开放 Q&A 问答时间。
Okay, so I went through the chat box. There was not any particular question. And if anyone have questions, feel free to either unmute yourself, just talk. You can speak either in Mandarin or English, either way works. Or you can enter your question into the chat box.
现在还没有看到那个对话框里面的提问哈，所以大家也可以踊跃的发言，可以用语音的方式来提问，不管是用中文还是英文都可以，也可以在对话框当中提出你的问题。
And as we're waiting, I want to read that, like the first couple of chats are comments about your mom's artworks, including wow, so artistic and elegant, and wow, thanks so much for sharing. Yeah, they are really amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm very proud of her work.
Oh, Rebekah, there's a question by one of the participants. Can you read the Chinese and translate for Ann?
Sure. Yeah. Chat box 当中提出的第一个问题是想问老师对于我们这些临床工作者有没有建议呢？一方面认识到严重精神病来访需要药物，包括法律或咨询规范的要求；另外一方面又发现药物有刚才说的不好的反应。So this is a question for you, Ann, and I think this may come from a clinical clinician, and they wonder if you have any advice for clinicians, because they mentioned on one hand they recognize for people struggling, or they believe on one hand for people struggling with severe psychosis, they will benefit from medication. Also, that's part of the requirement. That's part of legal or ethical requirement. On the other hand, they realize there are a lot of adverse or side effects, as you mentioned. So they wonder what would be your suggestions for them.
I'm not a doctor nor a specialist, especially when it comes to psychosis. I would refer you to the writings of Joanna Moncrief, a psychiatrist in the United Kingdom. And I just heard her on a talk today, and her advice is to use the drugs as little as possible in a dose and for as short a time as necessary, and to provide other supports for the person. But I would look up the writings of Joanna Moncrief.
他的回应是，我自己不是医生，也不是专家，尤其是当谈论这个精神病性问题的时候啊，我可能会请你去看一看Joanne 的一些文献啊。刚刚怀宇也把这个英国的精神病学家的名字放在了 chat box 里面。安提到他今天才听到这位精神病学家的一个演讲哈，他的建议是尽可能少的使用药物，尽可能在短时间内不到非必须的情况，只在非必须的情况尽可能少的在短时间内使用药物，并且也提供药物之外的。
Yeah. Thank you, Ann. So,
shall I read the second question?
Yeah, the second question, please. Yeah.
Okay. 第二个问题是来自 Peter， 是请问老师对于生物心理社会医学模式怎么看？And this is a question for you regarding what's your opinion? What do you think of the psychosocial, biopsychosocial model, medical model, biopsychosocial medical model? What's your opinion? What do you think?
I think that the biological part has largely been disproven. The last place I would ever go if I were feeling emotional distress is to the office of a psychiatrist. With what I know now, I really believe that we have to look at I'll just call it the water that you're swimming in. What is the water that you're swimming in? There's something in that environment that's causing you distress, and it's not, something that you inherited, or something wrong with your brain. It's something in your environment, and you're responding to that. So, what are some ways to better respond to the environment? What are some ways to change things?
安的回应是，我认为生理的部分已经很大程度上被证伪了。我觉得我最后才会去的地方是，或者是我可能不太会去的一个地方是，如果我感觉到有情绪上的痛苦的时候，我不太会选择去看一个精神科医生，因为我现在已经了解他们工作的方式了。我真正相信的是，我们要观察我们所在的环境，你所在的环境是什么样子的？环境当中有什么东西导致了你的痛苦，引发了你的痛苦？而不是你内心或者是你本身就是有问题的，或者你本身你的脑子就是有问题的。我相信它是环境影响你的，而你回应那个环境的方式，我们能不能找到更好的方式来回应那样的环境？找到一些可以改变这些事情的方式。
Thank you. So I can read the English for the next question, and you can translate. And thank you so much for your sharing. What would you say to people who are taking a number of medications for mental health challenges and are afraid of decompensation if they stop, but do want to taper off?
That is a very big challenge. I think that you really need to work with a therapist, a doctor, if a doctor will help you taper off. But many of them don't know how slowly you really need to go so that you don't have very bad withdrawal effects.
这个问题呢，是说对于那些服用了为了精神疾病服用了很多药物，害怕如果停止下来可能会出现一些代偿失调的情况的人来说，你对他们会什么建议呢？安的回应是，它会是一个很大的挑战。我想这样的人可能真的需要跟心理治疗师、跟医生一起工作。如果这个医生能够帮助你慢慢减少药量，那很多医生其实并不知道，其实你真正需要用很慢的速度来减少药量，才不会有这样非常糟糕的阶段反应。
There are doctors here in the United States that specialize in helping people get off of psychiatric drugs. If you go to the website madinamerica.com and look at their resources link, you can find people there. The other source that I know of that's very reputable is called Inner Compass Initiative. And they have a guide and they have support people who will help you discontinue psychiatric drugs.
安也对此提供了一些在美国的资源。他提到美国有一些医生是专门擅长帮助人们戒掉这个精神类的药物的。他推荐了2个资源，一个资源叫 Made in America， 这里会有一些人提供一些讯息。另外一个资源他觉得是很有帮助的，叫做 Inner Compass Initiative。这个机构会提供一个指南，它帮助人们停止使用精神类药物。
But I would say don't try to taper by yourself, and be sure that you have someone that you can work with, that you trust, that will guide you, either a doctor or a therapist.
但是我想强调，不要只是靠自己来尝试，停药或者是减药，确保你有人是跟你一起工作，确保他是一个你能够相信的人，他能够指引你，不管他是医生还是一个心理治疗师。
Thanks for sharing the resources, and I put the names and the websites into the chat. And in addition to what you have shared, I'm also adding a Chinese version of a harm reduction based approach to tapering by Will Hall. And that's the link that I shared in the chat.
华语已经把安提到的2个资源放在了对话框当中，华语还补充了一个中文的资源啊，大家可以看。Shall I move to the next question?
Sure.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I wonder what made you seek help from energy healer. How did that help? 有人询问哈，安是为什么要去找一个能量治愈的者来提供帮助？当时这又对安提供什么样的帮助呢？
So I sought out an energy healer because absolutely nothing was working. I had taken opioids for 4 years for the pain. I had bruises all over my legs from injections. I had been hospitalized 5 times. Nothing was working. And 2 car crashes were enough to make me realize either I could kill myself by accident or I could kill somebody else. And I needed to do something completely different than what I was doing.
他的回应是，我当时去找一个能量疗愈者，是因为我发现其他的东西都对我没有用。我已经服用阿片类的药物4年，我的腿上都是通过注射产生的淤青，我已经入院治疗5次，什么都没有帮助。2次车祸已经足够让我意识到。
I'm sorry, Rebekah. I muted you by accident. I was trying to mute someone else who were talking.
That's okay. Yeah. Where was I? What's the last thing you heard from me? I would do that all over again.
Sorry, I was busy trying to track the person. Sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. Yeah. 安的回答是，我去寻找能量疗愈者呢，是因为当时我发现什么都没用了。我服用阿片类的药物有4年，我的腿上全都是因为注射产生的淤青。我已经入院治疗5次，高达5次，什么都没有用。而2次车祸已经足以让我意识到，要么我就会杀掉我自己，不小心因为意外丧生，要么我可能会伤害或者杀掉另外一个。所以我当时需要做一些完全跟我以前做的东西完全不同的疗愈的方式。
There's not any more question at this moment, but a comment about how the most ideal psychiatric care is individualized approach, but in actual practice, it can be really challenging, especially when resource is really not very much available, and just use medications or over medicating would not work.
Right. I agree. we actually have to create a new system. This is where we are. We know what doesn't work. We know what harms people, but we have to create the structures that can help people. And I think that's the place where we are right now.
我们需要创造新的系统，因为我们知道，什么样的系统它是没有用的，它是会伤害到人们的。所以我们需要创造新的结构来帮助人们。我想这就是我们所在的这个时刻，这个时代。
And one more thing about energy healing, I had gone to acupuncture for over 10 years, so I was acquainted with the idea of energy being very important for health, the energy of the 5 elements that acupuncturists work on. So making the jump to work with an energy healer, an equally invisible and mysterious source of help, was not that big of a jump for me.
另外，想关于能量疗愈，想补充的一点是，当时我已经接受针灸治疗超过10年的时间了，所以我很熟悉关于能量的概念。我了解能量对于健康是非常重要的。我也了解，针灸是基于能量当中的5个元素。所以当时决定去跟一个能量疗愈者工作，对我来说，虽然看起来是有一点神秘哈。但是其实对我来说并不是一个大的对不同来说并不是一个大的转变大的变化。
Thanks for sharing that, Anne. And I have a follow-up question about energy healer. As I recall, you mentioned that the energy healer was really trying to help you sort out what kind of energy was really negative, toxic for you. And I wondered if that was kind of really worked to help you understand your context better instead of kind of looking for problems within. You kind of looked for the context, the circumstances that led to your struggles.
Yes, and the more I began to understand about how I could sense other people's energies, and especially negative energies, the more I was able to protect myself, so to speak. So when I was teaching, especially, I had high school students with learning disabilities, and they were often very angry because they weren't succeeding in school. So some of them were verbally abusing me, and I could do things to shield myself and deflect some of that energy rather than just keep absorbing it.
关于补充的一个问题，关于能量疗愈，关于说，你提到能量疗愈真的帮助你找到生活当中有哪些负性的能量，而不是让你一直怀疑自己发生了什么问题，帮助你理解你所在的环境。安说的确如此哈，我越了解到，我越感受到，周围人其他人的能量，尤其是负性的能量，我就越能够保护我自己。比如说我教书的时候，会遇到一些有学习障碍的高中生哈，他们通常呢，因为学业上并不顺利啊，很愤怒或者很容易愤怒起，所以他们当中会有一些人，讲出虐待性或者是这个难听的语言哈，对我来说，可是我那个时候就能够保护我自己的能量啊，而不是只是吸收那些负性的能量。
Thanks so much for sharing that. Seems like this is a good timing to ask you the last question, Anne. What's the take-home message you would like the participants to receive from you today?
Just be kind to yourself, and know that there's a way out of whatever it is you're experiencing. And especially if you are a therapist, trust that you will find the resources, the right resources to be able to help the people that you're working with, and empower them to improve their lives.
关于提问哈，最后安希望我们今天的参与者得到什么样的启示呢？安的回应是，希望你温柔的对待自己哈，知道总是有出路的，不管你在经历什么，总是有出路的。那尤其是如果你是一个治疗师、咨询师，要相信你会找到正确的资源，能够帮助你正在与之工作的人们哈，能够给他们力量，改善他们的生活。
Thank you for this very loving and beautiful message, and really appreciate. And we are about to cross our time boundary, and today we are doing really well with time. Yay! that's great. And there's some acknowledgement of you, Anne. And I'm just gonna be ending the recording as we are finishing this interview and discussion.
感谢大家的参与，我们时间也差不多了，然后会暂停这个录制。